Good morning and welcome to Wednesday's episode of Trending. I hope you're well wherever you are in the world. Well, there's only one story that's making all the headlines around the UK papers this morning. And no, it's not that the world's leaders and industry thought leaders and pointless celebrities have all descended to the Swiss Alps for the annual WEF meeting in Davos. No, it's all about Brooklyn Beckham and his feud between him and his wife and his family, his mum, dad, and rest of his family, essentially, right? So that's what's making the headlines. Almost every paper that you look at, there is at least 5 or 6 stories about that exact thing. Who cares? It's so easy to see why the country and the wider world are so dumbed down to what's really going on when that's the kind of crap that's making the headlines. It's utterly pathetic. And it's got no business of anybody else. The guy's clearly trying to get attention. I don't care whether it's true or whether it's not. It's a family matter. It's got no impact on me or you or any of the wider world. It's an internal family matter. What does have an impact, however, on you and me is that Dad David Beckham is one of those stooges in Davos this week. So the World Economic Forum, which has been around obviously for a long period now, formerly headed by Klaus Schwab, the author of the book The Great Reset, You'll Own Nothing and Be Happy, You Will Eat the Bugs, all of that. Now, he obviously resigned or announced that he was leaving a couple of years ago, or about a year ago, and people got very excited and said, great, that's the end of it. Well, it's clearly not, is it? Because they're all still transcending on Davos. There's simply been a new appointed leader, and the WEF is carrying on as it always has. Now, the World Economic Forum is the most open and obvious example of what globalism and what deep state stands for. It's a group of puppets. It's a group of people elected or appointed or industry leaders, business operators, corporate people, celebrities, and so on. They all descend on this one place to chat about ideas, chat about how they're going to change the world and, in their words, make the world a better place. Well, nothing's really come from that, has it? How they're going to tackle things like make-believe climate change, how they're going to tackle foreign wars and all of those things. Now, all of these people being sat with each other happened in closed-door meetings. There's some speeches, of course, but nobody knows what conversations are really going on. And you've got people supposedly working together for the betterment of the world. Well, we all know that's not what really happens, hence why, as I say, what tends to come out of these things is more centralisation of power, more policy diktat that just rolls out right across the world, so more globalization. The leaders and people like Starmer and people like Macron, and Trump's on his way, Farage is there this year, they're all essentially getting their orders. But one of the keys is this doesn't stop with the WEF. The WEF is not the pinnacle. It's not the top of the pyramid. It's another gopher stooge organization where even the people within that will be dictated to. It's higher up the pecking order than most world governments, but it's certainly not the end of the story. There is people above them, and they use organizations like the WEF, like the Bilderberg Group formerly, other secret societies, the Club of Rome, the Freemasons, the Knights Templar, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, all of those. They use these organizations to filter through their agenda for the world, very simply. But the reason I mentioned the Beckhams is because last year you had a former Manchester United defender, Gary Neville, there, who's now a massive Labour supporter and Labour activist and does everything he can to get everything pretty much wrong. And then you've got David Beckham, who has been a system stooge for decades now. Whenever the system need a renter mouth and they want something selling to a population, then they will use people like him. He does it, obviously, to get his fame and his fortune and his accolades and his MBE now, when really the guy is a footballer. He knows nothing about the rest of the wider world, or does he? Is he complicit in what he's doing? I don't know. I'll leave that for you to decide. Either way, invariably, when celebrities go to things like this, they then follow by spouting a load of nonsense, which was probably given to them while at these meetings in terms of what they need to be doing to sell the next part of the agenda. But the reason that Davos is so interesting, because it's the most blatant public display of what we know goes on behind the scenes all the time, and that's why so many people centre around it and see it as a real focal point to expose globalization and expose the centralisation of power and dictating to the wider world. There's some interesting figures there this year. Katy Perry, who is apparently officially the girlfriend of former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, is there. Obviously, the Beckhams are there. Trump's on his way. Farage is there. You know, anti-system Farage, the man who previously said that organisations like the WEF had no right to dictate anything in governments of individual countries. Well, he's there because he's obviously going, because he's getting closer and closer to the corridors of power. Trump's there. Well, what he's going to say, who knows? But apparently he's going to go and tear the globalists apart and tell them their global plan has failed. Well, I doubt he'll do that because he's owned by the same people that own the WEF. So whatever Trump does, whatever it appears on the surface, it's only going to be for the further and betterment of the agenda behind the scenes. And sometimes pretend squabbles, like we're seeing now, are actually ways to move the agenda forward, aren't they? You know, they wanted to spend more money on defense. Well, all those countries are doing that now as a result of what Trump's doing. All those countries that wanted to impose more draconian measures, wanted to impose tighter rules on various different things, well, they're doing that. They want to increase the cost of living. Well, these tariffs are going to do that. So these pretend squabbles actually further the agenda. They don't go against it. So you always have to look one step beyond what may appear to be the obvious in the public eye. There's always a reason. There's the real reason and there's the sales pitch reason. And they're very rarely the same thing. The interesting thing to mention while I mentioned Trudeau is Callum Smiles, who's going to appear on Gareth's show this evening, is over in Davos covering for his media organisation, and he confronted the former Canadian Prime Minister about the impacts of the COVID jab and talked about the fact that people have actually died as a result of the jab. And let's look at the response of good old Justin and the contempt that he has for people.
Justin, you started smirking then when I asked you a question about how the fundamental human rights of those who didn't want to get vaccinated. Yet some people have died as a result of this. Is that really a smirking matter?
Why you push the Canada to vaccinate the people?
Pushing disinformation the way you have.
What is disinformation?
Irresponsible.
What, that people have died?
People in Canada to vaccinate.
I'm sorry, but that's
the COVID vaccine.
But that's not misinformation. My old cameraman's mother actually.
And you pushed them into jail.
My old cameraman's mother
Pastor Artur
actually
Pawlowski
died after complications from the COVID vaccine. So is that misinformation? Oh, now you're laughing.
My friend.
I'm George.
It's,
Danger of the COVID vaccine. You forced your people to take the vaccine. Can you sleep good with that on your shoulders?
Get together.
Many people died because of the vaccine.
yeah, but he should. Can you tell? No, but he should talk. Why do you want to back this up?
Laughing when having described to you that someone's died is a pretty psychopathic trait, is it not? Certainly not the trait you would expect in the leader or former leader of a country. Certainly not the trait you'd want in somebody appearing at an organisation like the WEF that are dictating what happens next in terms of the world stage. That's the kind of psychopathic trait you would expect in a psychopath, you know, a murderer, someone like that, somebody who has no empathy, somebody who has no remorse. But there's two things. They appoint these absolute buffoons to power who have no capacity for free thought. And the other thing is they do appoint and they do attract people with psychopathic tendencies. Because if you're going to roll out policies that you know are going to be detrimental to either people's health, whether that be physical, whether that be mental, spiritual, it's going to be detrimental to people's ability to earn a living, it's going to be detrimental to the wider society of the country that you are elected to represent, and in turn the wider world, you know you're going to be doing those things, then you've got to be pretty psychopathic to accept that job, haven't you? You've got to have those character traits that I mentioned of having no empathy, of having no remorse. And that's why all these world leaders that you see have such contempt for the people that they are supposed to represent. They have contempt for people that challenge them. They have contempt for people that point out their flaws, point out their U-turns, point out policies that they have rolled out that have actually made people's lives worse. They don't want to hear those things. But they're there. You know, Trudeau oversaw one of the most draconian countries in the world through that period. Whether that be the way they dealt with the truckers, whether that be the way they rolled out the jabs, whether that be the way they dealt with lockdowns. You don't get to wash your hands of that when the side effects and the knock-on effects of that, whether that be people losing their lives, whether that be people losing their livelihoods, when they're still going on. There's people there in Canada and other countries now that don't have their parents, that don't have their brothers and sisters, that don't have their family or friends, don't have their husband or wife because of this jab. You don't get to walk away from that and laugh when you're confronted about it. These people are demons of the highest order. But when you strip it back, they still are just gophers. Nobody that's at Davos is a real leader. Nobody that's at Davos is the real governor in charge of what's going on. They're just playing it out. They're using the organizations, the governments, the corporations, the media influence. They're just playing out the agenda. They're selling it. They're implementing it through business regulations, through products, through government policies, through media propaganda. That's what the WEF is there for. It's there where people will go and get their orders, and then they go out and carry those orders out in their very different ways. But ultimately, the WEF or the WEF, whatever you want to call it, is still just a group of gophers. It's not where the end of the story is. And we need to go to that next level of, right, who's behind the WEF? Who controls this? And you'll be getting much closer to where the real power lies. Focusing on organizations like the WEF is important because it's a public display of the people that are in those positions that you know they're owned. You know they belong to this. So when they announce certain policies, you know where that's coming from. You know this is not an organic idea that a certain MP may have had or a certain corporation may have had. You know that's coming from that central point, so therefore you know they are owned. We see this a lot on Twitter and other social media platforms. When an MP is appointed, whether it be a new MP, whether it be a new minister, people will immediately point out, oh, they were on the WEF. They were a young leader. They were this, they were that. They will point out their connections to the WEF. And invariably, anyone in a position of power, in Europe in particular, will have connections to the World Economic Forum. But what's above them? The WEF is a really clear visual representation of globalization, and it shows where these politicians' loyalties and allegiances are. But it's only the step one. There's steps beyond that. So focusing on these organizations and pointing out the connections they have is very, very important. Focusing on them to the point that you think that's where the agenda ends, and the agenda ends with Klaus Schwab, that's where we need to stop. We need to go that one step further. We get to this point, okay, what's behind the WEF? What's that next level? And that's where, it's important that we ask those questions and we find out those answers, because they will take us into areas and into people and into organizations that we've probably never even heard of. Maybe they will even take us off planet. Who knows? Because there's so much we don't know. And while we're focusing on the five-sense reality of finance, of politics, of media, of science, and all of those things, which are important to talk about. We talk about them every day here. They're important to highlight, but they're important to have in context that they are merely a puzzle piece within the picture. And the picture is much more vast than the WEF. So it'll be interesting to see what's announced or what comes out in the weeks following this summit. As I said, the people there are just getting their orders. They're just there to then roll out. Nothing's being decided at Davos. It's already been decided. They're using that forum to basically, as I say, give people their orders that they then go back into their various industries and various countries and attempt to play that agenda out. It's very, very clear. We've seen it decade after decade in these various different secret societies or semi-secret groups or think tanks or world forums, business thought lead, all those things. We've seen it all. And we'll see it again, I'm sure. But what's behind the WEF? That's the question I want to know. Right, if you're watching with us on YouTube or X, thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to carry on iconic.com. We're going to talk about the UK economy. We're going to talk about Kamala Harris. And we're going to talk a little bit about climate change.